Welcome to Brave Media International. This is Brave Talk with Joshua Mtanyelwa, where we're looking at the issues that pertains Africa, where we're speaking to people in Africa that has made it, Africans that has turned the tide in Africa. Today we have one of those people who have turned the tide in Africa, and is one of the guys that has made inroads, has brought peace in our community, has done great things in our community. So today we have a powerful guest. So after the short break, we'll introduce our guest. Welcome back to Brave Media International, Brave Talk with Joshua Mtanyelwa. Today, we have a very great man and a son of the soil, an African indeed. A man who's well-educated, a man who's a community builder, a man who understands the law, a man who's a politician by calling. Today, our guest is Mr. Sibeko, Mkhabela Sibeko, and he's going to be our guest for today. Babu Sibeko, we want to welcome you to Brave Media International.
Thank you for the humbling introduction, Fundisi. Much appreciated.
Yeah. So, Babu Sibeko, all what we want to do, there are a lot of media houses, when they tell an African story, always they tell it in a negative way. If you look at the story of people in Ethiopia, when people were dying because of hunger and everything, they were showing children were very thin, they were showing people were dying, they were showing birds were about to eat people dying. But when there was, in September 9/11, we didn't see even one corpse on the street that was shown by the American media. So we want really to tell an African story that is told by African people. That's why today we're here. But maybe before we go any further, we just want to get your background, your family background, Babu Sibeko. If you can just and tell us your family background, where you from, and how many were you in the family? Yes.
Thank you for this. Maybe let me start off by saying we welcome the developments that brought a Brave Media into the space. As you correctly indicated, most media, especially Western media, is, if you like, captured. It's characterized by, storytelling that involves the hunter talking about the game.
Yeah.
And you never get the opportunity to hear the game actually giving sort of the analysis of how it survives the bullets of the hunter and those kind of things. So in a way, we welcome and wish you the best with this new media that is going to actually ensure that the downtrodden, those that have been actually seen to be less developed, less clever, get to actually to be affirmed. Coming back to the question that you've just asked me, I come from a family. Originally, we were 8 kids from a father who was never literate. I remember my father only started to write when we were already at secondary school.
Sure.
And I remember he struggled to write Sibeko. His S was always like this.
The opposite.
But I appreciated that.
Wow.
My mother was semi-literate. My mother at least was at least had the exposure to go to school, even though she never went beyond standard 5. I am the third of the 8 children. My sister, the eldest, unfortunately passed away in December of 2014. Before her passing on, my brother, who I came after, had passed on 5 weeks before, in November of 2014, which put me in a position where I became the eldest.
Wow.
By default. I have a sister and who comes after me, There were two other brothers that are deceased who came after the sister. And then we have a last born. But the last born, it was default because he was the seventh. The last born also passed away.
Sure.
I come from a family where we were named after our, clan. My name is Mkhabela, and you only find Mkhabela Sibeko in the Sibekos, or at least in the Lomos.
Yeah.
The brother I came after was Gembe. When you praise us, you call us Maziaga Gembe. The last born Yasekaya, Mazia. So we were named after the founding fathers of the Sibeko clan. At home, I was the first to attain matric, maybe even JC then, because I did JC, Journey Certificate, and then I went on to do matric in 1980 at Fumana.
Okay.
From Fumana, I went to the University of Fort Hare, where I enrolled for a bachelor's degree, majoring in psychology and sociology.
Wow. Maybe before we get to that education part, I'm interested because some people, when they see you sitting here, there's somebody who's watching you from Nairobi, Kenya, somebody who's watching you from Mozambique. Maybe they want to know where you're coming from, maybe the place where you grew up.
I grew up in a township called Thokoza, which later became shall I call it, a platform of internecine violence involving the IFP and the ANC. All my life. In fact, even I stay in Breckenest, which is about 5-6 kilometers from there. But whenever people ask me, where do I come from? I say to them, I come from Thokoza and sleep in Breckenest. Because all my social life is based there.
Yeah.
My everything, my friends, my family, even before I came here, I wired Thokoza.
So were you born in Thokoza or you moved in?
No, I wasn't born in Thokoza, I was born incidentally in Gwatuwatole, in Germiston, which is where my late maternal grandfather was a prominent businessman. In fact, my late grandfather was the first African butcher.
Okay.
In terms of the laws of apartheid at the time, no black man could operate a butchery if the current operator did not approve. So if you wanted to be, for instance, an undertaker, you needed to go to that man and say, please, can you talk to the authorities?
How did Thokoza come into existence?
In fact, my paternal parents, my paternal grandparents came from the old location of Alberton called Makokokwe.
Okay.
Now, with the advent of the Group Areas Act, people who had been there for more than 50 years in Alberton were forcibly removed from that place to Thokoza. Thokoza was officially born in 1958. That's when it was established.
Okay.
So then we in African practice or habits, normally whenever a girl is pregnant, they normally give birth emagubo. So by that time, my other siblings were already like alive. But what happened? My father's mother, who had gotten married to Sibeko, they were originally from Alberton, but my mother, my grandmother, then actually, after becoming Sibeko's second wife, my grandfather was a polygamist.
Okay.
then left Albertine. While all her sisters and siblings and everybody else came to Thokoza, she went to Grootfontein in Balfour, which is where we spent most of our time. Because my father was the youngest of all of them. And there was this thing that as the youngest, he needed to remain, a home defender. As a result, we were named by my grandmother. The eldest, igama lakhe ugogo.
Okay.
Waphiwa igama likagogo. So
all right.
normally when you give your name your child, out of respect, they don't say uselina, they bazothi ugogo.
Yeah. So ngasingazobiza ugogo ngegama.
And then kwazi uGembe ke kweza mina kweza uNomvula. Because we were in the farms, we were at the mercy of Amapul. 1 minute siyaxoshwa, we moved, we went to Heidelberg, stayed in Heidelberg. I can remember things that were happening when I was 2 years old.
Wow.
And I was 2 years in 1961. You can imagine.
Sure.
That's many years ago. I remember when we were evicted from Heidelberg, we went to stay in Brakpan. And young as I was, I knew at the time that the prime minister, apartheid prime minister, was a guy called Strydom. You could pick up from the old people's, hey, Strydom. Then after Strydom, we were evicted again. We moved to where Wispeko is. Do you know where
Wispeko? Yeah.
There was a farm there. I remember at that time, my grandmother had a goat, which we used to call Jim. She had been presented Jim while Jim was at a very tender sort of age. Now Jim grew up with human beings, boys and girls, and he or she, I can't remember the sex, became part of us. And that goat could do all sorts of nasty things. Sometimes it would fight with us. Sometimes it would eat meal. It would do anything and everything. You would find girls screaming. And when Gogo would ask, what's happening? Hey, Gogo, uchi mungsha ngenhlo, uchi done this, that, and the other. After that, I think the year around then was around almost 64, 65. From Wispeko, we moved to Angas. You see, we're gradually moving. And by that time, my father's brothers all had houses in the township.
Okay.
We would visit from Emaplazini, just cross. And then we moved to Angas. It used to be a farm owned by a guy called Henneman. So everyone knew Maute Siaga Henneman, Siapi. Until around 67, when some part of Thokoza was being built. There's a place, where there's a tennis court. The following street is called Mandisa Street. It had about 8 or 9 houses. The rest were informal settlements in Mkuku. But the municipality then decided to build houses. Then my gogo got a house there. Got a house there. Now what happened? The present house that we came to know as our home used to belong to my father's elder brother. Now, Ubabamkhulu had a difficult marital life. Well, we're too young to understand, but we know for a fact that Mamkhulu left her. After he had left him, he said, in fact, he liked my mother. But that's how we ended up owning the house as it was. It was around almost 67.
Wow.
Around almost 67. Since then, we've called the house home. Even to this day,
it's still called home.
It's still, yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's a boy that grew up in farms and grew up in the township in Tawoza, which was the smallest township in the East Rand, and you find yourself going to Fort Hare,
Yes.
and this is one I will say it's a prestigious in an African context is a prestigious university. You know how why Fort Hare?
Indeed, Mfundisi. You know, when I was young, my gogo, in fact, everyone, because like I say, we grew up in an environment of an extended family. My gogo picked me up. It's like I was anointed by my gogo. Guti, wayengibiza uNqeda athi ngiyinkosi yinyoni. So everyone who grew up with me accepted that very early that it was like I was anointed to be the leader of this clan. And of course, I must say I was blessed with a good intellect. Because even nasesikolweni, when I started school, ngangihlakaniphile. And when I decided to go to school, I had a very powerful mother. My mother used to say to me, "Yazi mntanami, had it not been for the fact that my mother passed away, I would have gotten very far with education. Because my mother was a businesswoman and was married to a butcher. But the only thing that actually spoiled the goal of attaining education on my part was because when my mother passed away, my father brought in a stepmother. And we were taken to Emaplazi, Konale, which is where she met my father. So because of the fact that she was bereaved very early in her life, my mother too was very clever, but she never got to really attain education because of the unfortunate passing on of her mother. But I think my late grandfather realized very late in his life that he had made blunders. You know, when you drive through this street that takes you to Kapo from hospital, you drive past the hostel, women hostel. There are shops there. There's a butcher written Tusanang Butcher. That Tusanang Butcher belonged to my grandfather.
Wow.
When he was about to pass on, he realized that, you know what, maybe I should betroth this to my daughter, because poverty was the order of the day when we grew up. Sure. And I think he was having this embarrassment feeling that, how can I, a successful butcher, allow my daughter to be under such poverty-stricken circumstances? But to cut a long story short, because by that time he was very sick, he never lived long to really realize his dream, because the woman he was married to was a sly person. I must tell you. You won't believe this, Mfundisi. Very late in my life, when I was now a deputy city manager at Egoroleni, my mother used to tell me about a lawyer who's now a judge today, this guy. He would say, "Hey, lawyer," I'll remember his name. That man is the man who, together with Mama, meaning the step, who defrauded us of our rightful, inheritance. So one day, during the mayoral golf days, as top management, we would be strategically seated with the guest of the mayor. Then I happened to sit on the same table with this guy. Makume is the surname.
Yeah.
And then I am Mkhabela Sibeko. No, I'm Makume. Oh, Makume. I said, yeah. And then I said to him, my mother never stops talking about you. He said, why? And then I reminded, I said, I was told you were a lawyer for such and such a person. The guy confessed. If I was a bad man, normally if judges are up for appointment. They go through this process of interview involving the Judicial Services Commission. If I was a bad man, because this guy actually confessed to say, you know what, Mfethu, I plead guilty. Mewani was bad news. But you know,
Sure.
you know, because what happened, she forged a marriage certificate that she was married legally to my grandfather, which was not the case. But to cut a long story short, Mfundisi, because of the powerful woman that my mother was, she was very instrumental in ensuring that I went to school.
Wow. Fort Hare Nochan.
Let me tell you, coming back to Fort Hare, unfortunately, at the time we went to Fort Hare. Of course, Fort Hare is you know, if I take you through this, there's a WhatsApp group of Fort Hare people, which includes both Mr Advocate, both Dr. Mazwai, the who's of business today. They're all here. Because Fort Hare was the only, no, not the only, it was one of the 3 universities that blacks could attend. It was Fort Hare, it was Ngoye, University of Zululand, and Teflop. So you either went to these other 2 or Fort Hare. So, of course, because Fort Hare had this thing that Mandela studied there, Mugabe, and many other African leaders, there was this thing that it was mandatory for me to go to Fort Hare. So I applied as I was doing matric in 1980, and after receiving exemption, I was admitted at Fort Hare in 1981. Unfortunately, the one thing that people had to accept being students of Fort Hare, it was popularly known as the center of African nationalism. And you were expected to sacrifice a little bit of your studies in the name of freedom. That is why in 1981, I did my first year, thanks to my late brother, who at least ensured, who sponsored me. But because I was a bit clever, I passed all my courses in my first year.
Wow.
That brought me a bursary. So going into second year, I had a bursary. Unfortunately, in 1982, we were expelled at Fort Hare because of these matters of national issues. So I had to forfeit the bursary. In 1983, I was forced to go and repeat my second year. There's an aunt of mine who's still alive, fortunately, who came to me and rescued me, because at the time, you needed to have 800 rand. It was a lot of money there from this. And after making some attempts to get sponsors and failing dismally, she said, "No, what? I'm going to withdraw my own money."
Wow.
And then if your uncle fights me, it's one fight I'm prepared to, put up with. So she withdrew her own 800 rand and gave me 100 rand. Because then I remember to buy a return ticket to the Eastern Cape was around 31 rands.
31 rand.
31 rands. So she took me, she was driving a Cressida. She took me, my bags and everything, and drove me to Germiston, where I boarded a train to the Eastern Cape. Of course, the understanding was that my mother would repay her on an installment basis, which she did. And then, fortunately, 83, I repeated, I passed with flying colors. Passed with flying colors with the result that in 84, when I was completing my first degree, there were bursaries lining up to get me.
Wow.
And I had to choose, because you couldn't have more than one. So then I chose one of the bursary. It was a Butlers Bank bursary, which enabled me to complete my degree in 1984. Should have completed in 83, but I didn't mind. That was my first degree.
Yeah.
Then
So I think my interest is in the political influence. Would you say your political influence you find it in Fort Hare, or was it your upbringing?
maybe you know, as a student, for instance, when we were doing matric, we used to take extra lessons at a place called Odin House in Braamfontein, which was actually frequented by Wits University students.
Okay.
By that time, we were already politically conscious.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember it was around the same time that the Release Mandela campaign started, 79, 80. And we signed the petitions for Mandela to be released. But going to Fort Hare was like you were going into some kind of the cauldron of serious concentration, because that's where you really got some kind of pressure to say, you know what, Brur, you have to make your own contribution. It is where we met guys like the late Rev. Arnold Stoffile. I first met Steve Chwete in the vicinity of Fort Hare. I first met Charles Ngakula, who was a journalist at the time, in that vicinity. One of my closest friends, by the way, at Fort Hare, was the late Bheki Mlangeni.
Wow.
Yeah, Bheki Mlangeni and I, in fact, a lot of people who know Fort Hare would confirm that Bheki and I were like this. Wow. So he too played a very important part in my politicization, as it were. So it was a process, but Fort Hare was like, unfortunately, one of the guys we were together as first year students at Fort Hare was the current SG of the ANC, Isma Khashule.
Living in Fort Hare now, you want to go work. So your work life, career life.
I think my first job was as a teacher at Landulwas. You know, incidental, what happened, the guy who was the principal at Landulwas was my teacher, both at Mapanzela and Togotala. He also knew that I was like a diligent student. There I was having a degree, but standing in the corners of Togosa. Because Landulwazi, before it had its own premises, it used to piggy at Mapanzela and Mkhatizwe. One day he was walking and he saw me at the corner. And he called me, he said, "Houndot, you need degree, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "No, what are you calling?" I said, "No, I'm selling the ISPA." And then he said to me, "No, man, come and teach. You can add value." That's how I got hoodwinked into teaching.
But did you like the whole issue of teaching?
Well, let me tell you.
Because it was coincidental.
It was coincidental, but you know what? Throughout my life, even at school, I used to teach a lot of people. In fact, sharing the information is part of my DNA, if you like. I remember, and it went on even to university level. I remember at university, after a lecture, there was this professor, a guy called Dr. Cunningham, who used to lecture us in industrial sociology. He used to pitch his lectures at such a high level that it was difficult for most students to comprehend. So you'd find me and him in class, engaging. And after class, people would come around me and say, "Hey man, we don't understand this, that, and the other," and I would start assisting them. So part of me, that notion of sharing, because I learned in matric that when you teach fellow pupils or students, you become even more cleverer. Yeah. It doesn't mean that by sharing that information, they are stealing from you. There's a guy, a friend of mine, who later became one of my best men when I got married. We were doing second year repeating second year in 1983. And we were in the dining hall, and he was saying to me, you know what? And the following day, we were due to write psychology second paper. And he was saying to me, you know what? I'm thinking of doing an agro-tet. Normally, students, when they are not ready, they go get a medical certificate and say, can I be allowed to write later? So he was saying, I'm thinking of doing that because I'm not ready for this paper. And I said to him, look, don't worry. You know what you need to do? At 10, come to my room. Bring a pen and a paper. I will teach you. And then he came. Believe it or not, Mfundisi, up to about 80% of what I taught him was there in the paper. That guy moved from a point of being hopeless to get an A. Naturally, I got a better A than him. Okay. But that's how. So sharing of information is part of my DNA. Wow. So I don't have a problem. Even right now, I was thinking, that I would exploit you. I know I'm being out of order.
Yeah.
I was saying, for instance, I know that you had a connection with Radio Cathoras.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, Radio Cathoras, when you look at my CV, I talk of the Cathoras Task Group. Mm-hmm. Its seeds emanated from that KTG, which was jointly shared by Mandela and de Klerk. The idea of setting up a community radio was planted there. But I was saying, maybe if I could get Mfundisi to turn their arm and allow me to have a slot where I speak on legal matters, labor law, family law, those kind of things. Do it on an unpaid basis, just to contribute. And
I want us, when we come back from the break, I want us to talk about your involvement, especially during the turmoil time in Thokoza. And also, maybe after that, we'll talk about you being in Eguruland municipality, your life there in London. So after the break, we'll come back and speaking to this amazing African whose life is really amazing. Like all of us, we have a story how we dealt with the Europeans after the break. Welcome back to Brave Media International. Brave Talk with Joshua Mtanyelwa. We are sitting here with an amazing son of the soil, an African man, and Babu Mkhabela Sibeko. Babu Mkhabela, I want us, because maybe my interest is there because I was a young adult. I was around 22 when that thing I said was happened, the violence that happens around 93, 94, before our election. So give us a background of that and your involvement in terms of bringing peace in that space and stability.
In fact, matters relating to my political life gained prominence after I had left Velco, having spent 3 years of my life there in the mines, where I also had a lot of challenges with apartheid because the Mines and Works Act was still there and racial discrimination was still very prominent. So I used to fight with it. At some stage, I was called a communist there. But then I then decided to come back home in 1989. Around the same time, there was that issue of the Kato versus GNT thing.
I remember.
From where we were, we saw that thing, that it was politically inspired and it was triggered by the third force. So, and even as we were discussing with people, they said, no, into a mapu. And then we nipped it in the bud with the formation of ICAPTA. But then there was this unbanning of political formations on February 2. Then the third force unleashed. It started as Xhosas versus Zulus. But we also knew that, no, this is a state-sponsored violence. We then decided to partner with Amaxhosa, if you like. Of course, a lot of people were driven out of the hostels because it was part of the strategy. In fact, the strategy of the Third Force, together with their partners in the IFP, was to conquer Gauteng, but they wanted first to conquer Kathoras so that it would be easy to go to the Vaal and Soweto. And so when it started, we knew what it meant. But then I was active, but I knew that, guys like Abu Sem, I grew up with them too. In fact, I remember we were together at Umkhatizwe in the late 60s, early 70s. We respected each other, but I said, no, Abu Sem is support and not become prominent leaders. Until it came to a stage where Abu Sem were assassinated and other leaders went into exile. We honestly became circumstantial leaders, where he said, no what, hey, society. And rather than, Oliver Tambo used to have a quotation where he said, there comes a time in the life of a nation where it's either you submit or you fight on. And we're not going to submit. So we took the same view to say, you know what, I don't know man see if or now I say I defend the gas. That's why I met guys like Abu Tuma. I actually met Tuma in 1989. Tuma originally comes from Soweto.
So Dumankosi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was small. Normally, these small townships are a bit toxic because I remember when Tuma came, a lot of people didn't want him to be a leader. Unfortunately, most of them, I personally knew that I'm a leader, and the leader, take rent. Yeah, and so personally, I made my own analysis that no, you know what? If we move over to a singer for Nutu, you yourself are discredited, so I'm not going to buy into that. So by doing that, unconsciously we became close. It was first as comrades, then of course it became friends. And we fought. Duma is a brave man. And I remember we set up, the township was divided into sections then. We set up those central command structures where we used to meet at Kehlegile every Tuesday, where we gave political leadership. We discussed anything and everything with the youngsters. For instance, we used to tell them that, look, comrades, in the course of defending our communities, we need to do it with a good moral compass. We need to do it with integrity. Because the Truth Commission is going to come. By that time, we knew that anything that is criminal can never be condoned. And and you can't come and seek refuge from us. So it was an ongoing thing. Guys like Robert McBride participated in those things. Louis Sibeko. And another youngster, the youngster that I told you about last, and many others. And when we started, we like I say, for instance, there was that KTG thing, which was because Duma had to go and make a presentation to the NEC led by Mandela at the then Shell House to say we were under attack, assist us with defenses. That's when guys like Robert McBride and others started participating in defense structures. And it went on, but it wasn't only political. We also got support from the then Rao University. Because as we're fighting on the political front, we also engaged in local government negotiations with the then Alberton Town Council in order for there to be established a democratic local government. So there was a guy who was the chair of the ex-Coden, a guy called Isaac de Villiers. I still meet him at gym. This guy was an academic, was a professor, an accountant from Rao University. When we started, obviously, the atmosphere was very adversarial. We were fighting. They were fighting with us to say, you blacks do not want to pay for service, because it was at the height of boycotts. And we're saying, yo, you whites are used to deciding for us. We refuse to pay for decisions that were made for us. We want decisions to be made with us. But from that point of being adversarial, we came closer, and became this. These guys had a lot of sessions with these youngsters, because when violence erupted, schooling came to a halt. So guys who were normally matriculates had to forget about schooling in order to defend communities. But we had this vision to say, once this whole thing is done, we need to support you. So you go to universities. For instance, a guy like Madoda, the one we were talking about, was part of the defense structures. And I remember I had to go with him to my banker, then Standard Bank, to say, please give him a bursary, I will stand guarantor. And he went to Durban West with them, and there were many others. Others are doctors today, successful people.
Wow.
But unfortunately, others became criminals, because you had that gang that when we made them police, they said, no, send me a chance, in the gun, in the uniform, I will take the opportunity to do. So that's how then we negotiated with the local authorities in Aloton to a point where we were supposed to have been amongst the first in the country to have a unified local government.
Welcome back to Brave Media International. Brave Talk with Joshua Mtanyelwa. Are we still sitting here with Ubaba Sibeko? Are we drinking from him? We feel like we are in a museum of history of our country. So as we're wrapping up, we just want to say, check on you, Ubaba Sibeko. And now you moved away from politics and you get to law. But what makes you to really get into law?
Well, firstly, let me indicate I haven't moved altogether from politics. I remain a member and disciplined and loyal member of the ANC. That said, I think the current political setup is a very toxic environment. And in fact, I decided in 2005, when I decided that I wanted to become a lawyer, I said, you know what? It's time I move out of this toxic environment, because I will die of stress. Even now, when comrades come to me, I say, hey, comrades, when I say I'm a lawyer, I say, I'm a lawyer, and as lawyers, we are paid per hour. I can't come a meeting in Lapong to spend 4 hours meeting in Zonpila, you see. So that was a very subtle way of pushing them. But I felt I still needed to make a contribution. That is why I joined the ANC Legal Research Lekgotla, where we deal with matters that would continue to protect the constitutional democracy that was set up post-94. At least the one good thing is that in this constitutional democracy, we don't owe allegiance to the ANC. We may be members of the ANC, but of critical and fundamental importance, the Constitution is that which we owe allegiance to. So yeah, I think my contribution now is going to be purely on matters of leadership, matters of good governance, matters of ensuring that we build new brigades of leaders that would take over from us as and when we begin, on the route to becoming old people. We need to leave a legacy that would ensure there's still hope. I still hope that once these criminals and corrupt people are flushed out of the system, we will rebuild the ANC, cleanse it, get rid of unwanted elements, and hand it over as a legacy to generations to come after us.
Sure. It's a very interesting thing. Maybe before we close up, the issue, like on your case, when you grew up, there was intentionality in terms of grooming you guys to be political activists. And do you think that culture still exists?
That is why Babu Mfundisi, let me tell you, it has actually veered off. You know, when I made reference to guys like the late Rev. Arnold Stofile, these are people who actually groomed us. These are people who said to us, look, you are students, you get degrees, but you have a responsibility to contribute to the efforts that are aimed at liberating this country. We think that we should still play that role. We should resuscitate it. And I'm glad a guy like David Masondo, Dr. David Masondo, who's the Deputy Minister for Finance, has been given that responsibility to groom leaders who would be taught the ethos and the ethics of the ANC principles and its values. Because we believe that by these, you see, unfortunately, things, I would be incorrect to say things started to go badly during Jacob Zuma. Things had started even to go badly before Jacob Zuma. But we had high hopes for Jacob Zuma. We had hoped that he was going to stop the rot. And what Jacob Zuma did, he perfected the rot. Things all moved from bad to worse. And those of us who still want to see Lelizwe lakhiwa ngendlela right, still think that there is hope that we can still correct things that have gone wrong in the ANC and in our country.
Sure. No, Babu Sibeko, thank you very much for being with us. And just as we wrap up, just two short parting words that you want to say to Africans that are listening to this program, to somebody who's somewhere in Kenya, somebody who's somewhere in Chad, that is, just what will you say?
Well, I will say we owe it to leaders like Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Samora Machel, Stephen Biko, Nelson Mandela, or Oliver Tambo, to ensure that we make success of governments that are led by African people. We owe it to them. And we dare not fail them, because history will judge us very harshly.
My producer, she's reminding me that I didn't ask you if you are married or you have a family. What?
Yeah, I am married. I've got two boys. My eldest son, Zwake, is 34. His younger brother, Siyabonga, abamthandayo bambiza DJ Capital, is 30. Yeah, I've got two boys. Yeah, I've been married to a wonderful woman called Zandile Ndaba. She was Ndaba then. She's Sibeko now.
Wow. Yeah. What's your favorite quote as we close?
Ooh.
I know as a lawyer, I've been reading a lot, but there must be a favorite quote that.
Well, in fact, sometimes I like to quote. There's an anonymous author who said that leadership is like a privilege. But with privileges come responsibility. So for me, it's very important at all sides that, as leaders, we should act in ways that are responsible.
Wow.
So that we do not actually fail the lead by not walking the talk. It's very important.
Wow. No, thank you very much for watching Brave Media International. Brave Talk with Joshua Mtanyelwa, and we had a very powerful guest in our midst. And we're planning to bring him back, and so that we can continue as African. Let's build together. Kwaheri, God bless you. Africa, my home. Africa, I belong.
akubonwa